I can't live without you." The words tore out of Cole Harrison's chest like something that had been buried alive for years, raw, broken, desperate. He stood in the rain, shaking, not from the cold, but from the truth he could no longer hold inside. Emily had her bag in her hand. Her eyes were red. She wasn't looking at him. And the strongest man in the valley, the man who never begged, never broke, never admitted he needed anyone, fell apart completely. If this story already has your heart, hit subscribe, drop a comment, telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. Cole Harrison hadn't spoken to another human being in 11 days. He knew because he counted. Not on purpose. It just happened the way things happen when you live long enough alone, that silence starts to feel like a second skin. 11 days since he'd driven into Ridgecrest to pick up fence wire and mineral salt for the cattle. 11 days since he'd nodded at the woman behind the counter at Teller's Hardware, and she'd smiled at him the way people smile at stray dogs, cautiously, like she wasn't sure whether he'd snap. He preferred it that way. Or at least, that's what he told himself every single morning when he pulled on his boots before sunrise and started the work that never ended on a ranch that never thanked him for it. Cole was 38 years old, though most people who didn't know him guessed older. The years hadn't been cruel to his body. He was still broad across the shoulders, still had the hands of a man who built things, rather than just talked about building them. But his eyes had aged. That was what people noticed first, and then tried not to stare at. His eyes looked like they'd seen something they couldn't unsee, and whatever it was had left a permanent frost behind them. He'd had those eyes for 6 years. 6 years since Sarah. He didn't say her name anymore. Not even in his own head, if he could help it. Sometimes it slipped through at night, in that half space between awake and sleeping, where you don't have enough guard up to stop things. He'd hear himself whisper it, and then he'd wake up and lie there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, until the sky turned gray enough to justify getting up and going outside and starting to work again. Work was the one thing that never lied to him. The horses didn't ask questions. The fence lines didn't expect him to smile. The cattle didn't care whether he'd eaten breakfast or whether the dark circles under his eyes had gotten worse since last Tuesday. Cole Harrison lived on 700 acres of land that his grandfather had broken his back to build, that his father had nearly drunk away, and that Cole himself had spent 20 years quietly saving $1 at a time. The Triple H Ranch sat at the base of the mountains, in a valley that was beautiful in the way Montana is always beautiful. The kind of beautiful that doesn't care whether you notice it or not. And Cole had mostly stopped noticing it. The morning that everything started to change, Cole was in the barn. He had his back to the doors, working on the left hind hoof of a big roan gelding named Reckless, who had earned that name twice over. Cole's jaw was tight, his shoulders set, his whole posture a closed door. He hadn't slept well. He never slept well when the wind came down hard off the mountains, because the sound it made moving through the old ranch house sounded too much like something alive. He heard his border collie, Grit, start barking from outside. Sharp, alert barks. Not the lazy I smell something interesting barking, but the something is wrong kind. Cole set down the hoofpick and straightened slowly. He rolled his neck once, listened. The barking kept coming. "All right," he said to no one. He walked out of the barn. The first thing he saw was the truck. It was a blue pickup, older model, sitting at a bad angle at the bottom of the gravel drive with one tire clearly flat, and the front driver's corner crumpled against the split-rail fence that marked the edge of the property. The engine was still running. The headlights were on, even though it was mid-morning. One of the fence posts was cracked clean in half. The second thing he saw was her. She was standing beside the truck with her arms wrapped around herself, not because it was cold, though it was, but because she looked like someone who had gotten into the habit of holding herself together. She had blonde hair pulled back, a jacket that wasn't heavy enough for the weather, and an expression on her face that was trying very hard to be calm and not entirely succeeding. She was looking at the fence. Then she looked at Cole. "I'm sorry about your fence," she said immediately. Her voice was clear, direct, no wobble in it, even though there was one around her jaw that she was working hard to control. "I'll pay for it. The road came up faster than I expected, and the tire went and I couldn't—" She stopped herself, took a breath. "I'm sorry. Are you the owner?" Cole looked at the fence, looked at the truck, looked at the tire. He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said. She waited, like she expected him to say more. He didn't. She swallowed. "Okay. Well, I have a spare in the back, but I can't get the lug nuts loose. The wrench I have isn't—" Another pause. She shifted her weight. "Is there somewhere nearby I could call a tow truck?" "No service out here," Cole said. "Cell coverage dies about 2 miles back." She closed her eyes for a half-second. He watched her recalibrate, watched her take whatever panic was moving underneath the surface and push it back down. He had to admit, she did it well. "Okay," she said again. The word was doing a lot of work for her. "Okay, can I use your landline, if you have one?" Cole looked at the sky. There was a line of weather moving in from the northwest. He'd noticed it the day before, the kind of low, serious cloud bank that didn't play around. The temperature had already dropped 4 degrees since breakfast. "Storm's coming," he said. She looked up, then looked back at him. "I can see that," she said. And there was something in her voice now. Not quite frustration, not quite fear, but a sharp edge that told him she was someone who didn't like to feel helpless. "That's actually why I'm in a hurry." He studied her for another long second. Something about her bothered him, though he couldn't have immediately explained what. She was young, younger than him by at least 10 years. She had the look of someone who had driven a long way and slept poorly and eaten irregularly and was running on something more stubborn than energy. She was running on sheer will. He recognized it because it was the only thing he'd been running on for 6 years. "Come inside," he said. "I'll change the tire after I call weather." She blinked. "You don't have to." "I know," he said, and turned and walked toward the house. There was a silence when she stepped inside the ranch house that was different from the silence Cole usually lived in. His silences had weight and age to them, the particular quiet of a place that had gotten used to being empty. Her presence disturbed it the same way wind disturbs still water. Not violently, but completely. She stood just inside the door, not moving further in, which he noticed and grudgingly appreciated. She wasn't one of those people who walked into somebody else's space like they owned it. "I'm Emily," she said. "Emily Carter." "Cole," he said. He was already moving toward the kitchen, toward the radio weather receiver on the counter. "Do you want me to wait outside?" He stopped, turned and looked at her with something that might have been disbelief if his face had been capable of more than its usual flat composure. "It's 34 degrees, he said. "I didn't want to assume." He stared at her for another moment, then turned back to the radio. "Sit down if you want." She didn't sit. She stood near the table, which he took note of without meaning to. She was waiting, not fidgeting, not making small talk, not trying to fill the quiet with noise. Just waiting, with her hands loose at her sides, her eyes moving around the space with a careful, observational quality that told him she was smart and she was taking inventory without making it obvious. The radio gave him what he expected. The storm would hit by mid-afternoon, heavy, sustained, dropping maybe 8 inches of snow in the higher elevations. Roads would be dangerous by early evening. He clicked it off. "You're not going anywhere today," he said without turning around. Behind him, a pause. "I have to be in Billings by—" "No, you don't." He finally turned to face her. "Road to the highway's already icing. By the time I get your tire changed, you've got maybe 40 minutes before you don't want to be on that road. And Billings is 3 hours out." She looked at him steadily. Her jaw was set. He understood she was calculating, the same way he would have. Looking for another option, running the numbers, trying to find the angle where she didn't have to accept help from a stranger. "I could just wait the storm out at your gate," she said. "In a truck with a questionable tire. It'll be fine." "It won't," Cole said flatly. "That temperature's going to drop another 15 degrees tonight. You'll burn through your gas running the heater, and then you'll freeze." She opened her mouth, closed it. He saw it. The moment she couldn't argue with the math anymore. Something moved across her face, too fast for him to name, but it left a resignation behind it that looked almost like pain. "I don't want to be a burden," she said. Her voice was even. But under the even was something careful, like she'd chosen that word specifically from a list of heavier ones. And Cole Harrison, who had spent 6 years feeling like his own existence had become a burden to the world, understood that sentence in a way he couldn't explain. "One night," he said. "There's a room at the end of the hall. Door locks from the inside if that matters to you." She looked at him. Really looked at him. Not at his face, but at something behind it. "Okay," she said. And this time the word sounded different, like it actually meant something. He changed the tire in the bitter pre-storm wind without asking for help. She came outside after 10 minutes and handed him a wrench without comment. A better one than the one she'd been working with, she explained. She'd found it in her toolbox under some gear in the truck bed. He took it, used it. Neither of them said anything for a few minutes. "Where are you coming from?" he asked finally, because the question was practical, because it didn't commit him to anything. "Denver," she said. "Long drive." "Yeah." "Family in Billings?" "No." A pause. "A job, maybe. An interview. I heard there was a veterinary clinic up there looking for a technician." She said it plainly, without apology or over-explanation. Cole tightened the last lug nut, stood up, wiped his hands on his jeans. "You know animals," he said. It wasn't really a question. "I know how to take care of things," she said quietly. "That part I'm good at." Something about the way she said it, that last part, with the faintest emphasis, made him look up at her. But she was looking at the truck tire, and the moment passed. By the time the snow started in earnest, she had fed herself from what she'd brought in a cooler from her truck and had offered him half, which he'd declined, and then she'd found the coffee maker on the counter and asked him without preamble if he minded if she made a pot. He said he didn't. The coffee filled the kitchen with a smell that hit Cole somewhere he hadn't expected to be hit. Sarah used to say that coffee was the smell of being safe. He hadn't made a full pot in 2 years. He usually just made enough for 1 cup in a small press and drank it standing over the sink in the gray pre-dawn, because it felt wasteful to make more for just himself. He didn't say any of that. Emily handed him a mug. He took it. They sat at opposite ends of the kitchen table, her near the window watching the snow, him near the wall doing nothing in particular. And the silence between them was strange, because it wasn't entirely uncomfortable. He kept waiting for it to become uncomfortable. It didn't. "You live alone out here?" she asked after a while. Not nosy. Just the quiet, practical curiosity of someone trying to understand the geography of a place. "Yes," he said. "For how long?" He thought about lying. Not about the number, but about whether to answer at all. 6 years, he said. She nodded, looked back at the window. "I've only been alone for 8 months," she said, "and I still can't—" She stopped, rerouted. "It gets easier, doesn't it?" He looked at her across the table. This woman, 26 years old or so, asking him with genuine open need. Whether pain got easier, the way you ask someone older. A question you're hoping they have a true answer for. He should have lied. He knew how to lie about this. He'd been doing it every time someone in town asked him how he was doing, and he said fine, and they said glad to hear it, and they both moved on. But something about the question, in this particular kitchen, on this particular night with the snow coming down outside and the coffee steam rising between them, made lying feel impossible. "Not easier," he said. "You just get better at carrying it." She looked at him, and for just a second, just one, her face opened up in a way that told him the thing she was carrying was heavy, and she was very, very tired. "Okay," she said softly. "That's honest. Thank you." Cole said nothing. He drank his coffee and looked at the table, and the silence came back, but it had changed again. Become something denser, more real. Grit came in from the back hall and lay down next to Emily's chair without being invited, which was notable because Grit had never in his life voluntarily gone near a stranger. Emily looked down at him, then at Cole, "He okay?" she asked. "He does what he wants," Cole said, which was not an explanation, but was also true. Emily lowered her hand slowly and let Grit sniff it. He did. Then he put his chin on his paws. Cole watched his dog lie down by a stranger's feet and felt something move in his chest that he immediately suppressed. He showed her the room. Clean. Sparse. There was a quilt on the bed that had been his grandmother's, in a pattern of blue and white diamonds. He almost took it off and found something less personal before she got to the door, but then she walked in and saw it, and her face did that same small opening thing, like someone had knocked quietly and she'd answered without meaning to. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's warm," he said, because that was safer. He pulled the door closed and walked back down the hall. He stood in the kitchen for a moment. Then he poured the rest of his coffee down the sink and rinsed the mug and set it face down on the rack and went to bed. He lay in the dark and listened to the snow against the windows and told himself he'd seen her tire changed and she'd leave in the morning, and that would be the end of it, and he'd go back to his 11 days and 12 days, and as many days as it took without speaking to anyone. He almost believed it. Around 2 in the morning, he heard a sound from the barn. Not Grit. Grit was on the mat by the back door. Not the wind. Something lower, more urgent. He was up and in his coat before he was fully awake. When he got to the barn, he found what he'd half expected from the afternoon. The young bay mare, Rosie, had gone into labor, and something was wrong. She was down, and her breathing was wrong, and the foal's positioning was wrong, and Cole knew in the first 30 seconds that he was in trouble. He didn't have time to think. He got his hands where they needed to be. He started working. He didn't hear the barn door behind him. "What do you need?" He startled hard, almost came up off his knees. Emily was standing 3 feet away, wearing her jacket over what looked like a borrowed flannel. She must have grabbed it from the hook by the back door. She was looking at the mare with calm, fast, professional eyes. "Get behind her. Keep her still. Don't let her—" Emily was already moving, already in position. Her hands went to the right places like she knew where the right places were. "How far along?" she asked. "Should have come this morning. Positioning's wrong." He was already repositioning. "I need her calm and still for maybe 3 minutes." "I've got her," Emily said. Her voice was low, solid, steady. The kind of voice that worked on frightened animals and frightened people equally. Cole worked. The next 20 minutes were the longest of his recent memory. He didn't think. His hands knew what to do, and he let them do it, working with everything he had, aware of Emily at the other end, holding the mare steady, with a combination of physical strength and a kind of radiating calm that she was genuinely projecting, not performing. And then the foal came. It came loud and messy and alive, and Cole sat back on his heels breathing hard, and the foal scrambled and found its feet with the particular wild urgency of new creatures. And the mare made a sound that Cole had always thought was one of the most extraordinary sounds in the world. He put his arm across his knees and breathed. "Nice work," Emily said softly, from the other end of the mare. She wasn't looking at Cole. She was looking at the foal. Cole looked at her. She was filthy. She had straw in her hair and something worse on her jacket sleeve, and her cheeks were flushed from the cold and the exertion. She was running one hand carefully down the mare's neck with a gentleness that was completely unself-conscious. She looked up and caught him looking at her. "Sorry," she said. "I heard something, and I looked out my window, and the barn light." She paused. "I didn't mean to interfere." "You didn't," Cole said. She looked at him. "You helped," he said. The words came out rougher than he intended, partly because they were true, and partly because he wasn't used to saying them. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at the foal. "What's his name going to be?" she asked. Cole hadn't thought about it. He looked at the foal, small, dark, already working on standing like it meant it. "Don't know yet," he said. Emily watched the foal for a moment. Something moved in her face, a softness, private and real. "Chance," she said quietly, like she was saying it to herself. "He looks like a chance to me." Cole said nothing, but he didn't disagree. They sat in the barn for another hour, not because they needed to, but because neither of them left. Cole sat on an overturned feed bucket. Emily sat on a hay bale she'd pulled up 4 feet away. The mare was settled. The foal was nursing. Grit had appeared from somewhere and settled himself near the barn door like a small, self-appointed sentry. It was 3:30 in the morning, and Cole Harrison was sitting in his barn with a woman he hadn't known 12 hours ago. And the silence between them wasn't the silence of a man alone. It was something else entirely. "You've done this before," Cole said. Not a question. "I worked at an equine rescue outside of Boulder for 3 years," she said. "Before that, a vet clinic outside of Denver. Large animals mostly, some small." A pause. "I know what I'm doing, with animals anyway." A shorter pause. "With most other things, I'm less certain." He didn't respond to that. It wasn't his place. "What happened in Denver?" he asked instead. It was too direct. He knew it the second it left his mouth. He almost walked it back. Emily was quiet for a long moment. "The same thing that happens," she said simply. "You trust someone. You build something with them. And then you find out what you built wasn't what you thought it was." She paused. "It wasn't violent. He didn't hurt me. He just—" She stopped. Tried again. "He made me feel like I was always too much and never enough at the same time, and I spent 4 years trying to figure out how to be both, and I couldn't, and by the time I understood I should just leave, I'd gotten so small I could barely find my way to the door." Cole sat with that. It was probably the most honest thing anyone had said to him in years. Not because it was dramatic. It wasn't. It was the opposite. It was the particular honesty of someone who has said a thing so many times inside their own head that saying it out loud no longer feels like exposure, just like fact. "And you left," he said. "And I left," she said. The foal shifted, pressed closer to the mare, found its balance. "Good," Cole said. Emily looked at him. "Good?" she said. "That you left," he said. "That you found the door." She looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression. "Took me long enough," she said softly. "Doesn't matter how long it takes," Cole said. The words surprised him. He hadn't planned them. "Matters that you did." They sat in silence after that. But it was the new kind of silence, the one that had been growing all evening, changed and deepened, no longer empty, but weighted with something Cole couldn't name and wasn't ready to name. Outside, the snow had stopped. The clouds were breaking. The first gray light of a Montana dawn was beginning at the edges of the world. Cole looked at it through the barn door and felt something that was almost like recognition, like the feeling of looking at something familiar that you've somehow managed to forget. He looked down at his hands. They had saved the foal tonight. They had done something useful. For the first time in a very long time, that felt like it might be enough. He didn't look at Emily again. But he knew she was there. He was aware of her presence the way you're aware of a fire when you've been cold for a long time. Not with gratitude yet, but with a kind of stunned, helpless acknowledgement that the warmth is real. He stood up, rolled his shoulders. "You should sleep," he said. "A few hours at least." She stood too, stretched her arms above her head with the simple unself-consciousness of someone exhausted. "Yeah," she said. They walked back to the house in the early gray light, not side by side, but near enough. Neither of them spoke. At the end of the hall, she stopped at her door. "Cole," she said. He stopped. "Thank you. For tonight." She meant the barn. She meant the room. Maybe she meant the conversation. He wasn't sure. All of it. He looked at her standing in the doorway of his grandmother's room, wrapped in a borrowed flannel, with straw in her hair, and something real and undefended in her expression, and he felt something shift in his chest that he immediately, instinctively tried to close down. "Get some sleep," he said. He walked to his own room. He sat on the edge of his bed in the dark, and Cole Harrison, who had spent 6 years learning not to feel anything he couldn't control, pressed his hands flat against his knees and breathed slowly, and told himself that one storm and one stranded woman and one good night in the barn, didn't mean anything. He almost believed it. But the name she'd given the foal sat in his head like a small, persistent light. Chance. He lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling and listened to the ranch wake up around him. The first sounds of the horses stirring, the birds beginning somewhere outside, the world resuming after the storm. And for the first time in 6 years, the silence didn't feel entirely like something to endure. It felt, just barely, like something that might one day be different. He didn't know what to do with that, so he got up, put on his boots, and went back to work. She was supposed to leave the next morning. That was the agreement. One night. Storm passes, tires good, roads clear, she goes. Simple. Clean. The kind of transaction that doesn't leave marks. Except the morning came, and Emily Carter was standing in Cole's kitchen at 6 a.m., with her sleeves rolled up and flour on her hands and something on the stove that smelled like it had no business being that good in a house that had smelled like nothing for years. Cole stopped in the doorway. She didn't hear him. She was talking to Grit, who was sitting at her feet with the expression of a dog who had completely abandoned his principles and was not even slightly sorry about it. She was telling him something about eggs, about how you had to let the pan get hot first, about how most people were too impatient, and that was why their eggs were wrong. Grit was listening like she was reading him scripture. Cole cleared his throat. She turned, not startled, just natural, the way people turn when they're comfortable in a space. And then she caught herself, and something shifted in her expression. Not guilt exactly, more like awareness. "I found your pantry," she said. "I hope that's okay. I was going to leave something for you before I went, since last night." She paused. "I can clean it up if you'd rather." "Smells fine," Cole said, which was the most dishonest thing he'd said in years, because it didn't smell fine. It smelled extraordinary. It smelled like a house with someone in it. He sat down at the table without being asked, and she put a plate in front of him, without ceremony, eggs and something with cheese and peppers from what must have been a can. She'd found in the back of his pantry, and he ate it and didn't say a word, and she ate hers at the other end of the table and fed pieces of toast to Grit when she thought Cole wasn't watching. He was watching. "The road's clear," he said when the plates were empty. "I checked at 5. "I know," she said. "I checked too." She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug, looked at it. "I called the clinic in Billings from your landline. I hope that's okay. The position was filled 3 days ago." He looked at her. "Someone took it before the posting came down," she said, still looking at her coffee. Her voice was even, very controlled. "So." A pause. "I need to figure out where I'm going next." The word hung there, next, like she had a list, like she'd been going through it for a while. Cole looked at his empty plate. Then he looked at the mare through the kitchen window. Rosie and Chance, out in the paddock in the clear cold morning after the storm. He didn't know why he said what he said next. He would think about it later and still not know. It went against everything 6 years had taught him. It went against every wall he'd built and reinforced and was still adding stones to, but he said it. "I've got more work here than I can run alone," he said. He kept his voice flat, practical, like he was talking about a broken fence post. "The books are a mess. Equipment needs organizing. I've got 3 horses that need consistent handling, and I haven't had time." He paused. "If you needed somewhere to be while you figured out the next thing." She looked up from her coffee slowly. He didn't look back. He looked at the window. "I'd pay you," he said. "Not much, but room and board included." The silence stretched out long enough that he almost took it back. Almost stood up and said, "Never mind, forget it, bad idea." He was already building the sentence in his head. Then she said, "Okay." Just that. Okay. The way she'd been saying it since she arrived, like the word was a tool she'd learned to use carefully. Cole nodded once, stood up, picked up his plate. "There's a fence on the north line that needs looking at today," he said. "If you want to come, I'll show you how the property runs." She stood too, set her mug in the sink. "Let me get my boots," she said. Within 3 days, Cole understood he had made either the best or worst decision of the last 6 years. He hadn't determined which yet. Emily Carter worked hard. That was the first thing he had to acknowledge and then put somewhere because he didn't know what to do with it. She was up before he expected her, always. She learned where things were without asking twice. She didn't talk when there was no reason to talk, and she did talk when something needed to be said, and the combination of those two things was so foreign to him that it took him several days to stop bracing for whichever one he'd gotten wrong. She was good with his horses. Better than good. She moved around them with that particular quality some people have, that thing that isn't bravado or technique, but something quieter and more essential, an understanding that animals read your interior state before they read anything you do with your body. She was honest, and the horses knew it, and they responded to it. He watched her with the big gray gelding, Gunsmoke, one afternoon. Gunsmoke had a history Cole knew something about. Previous owner who'd used pressure where patience was the right tool. Some damage in there that showed up as quick spooking and a tendency to pin his ears when a certain kind of tension entered the space around him. He'd been difficult since Cole bought him at auction 8 months ago. Cole had been working on it slowly, carefully, without enough time. Emily stood at the fence of Gunsmoke's paddock for 20 minutes without going in, just standing, not looking directly at the horse, letting him get used to her being there. Cole was repairing a gate latch nearby. He was not watching. Or he was watching, but not in a way he was admitting. Eventually, Gunsmoke walked over to her. She let him smell her hand. Let him move away when he wanted. Let him come back. She didn't reach for him. She waited until he was the one reaching. Cole set down his pliers. "What did they do to him?" Emily asked without turning around. Previous owner used a chain lead on him. She said something quiet under her breath that Cole chose to respect by not asking her to repeat. "He'll be okay," she said. "He's still trying. That's all you need. If they're still trying, you can get them back." She finally turned to look at Cole. "How long have you been working with him?" 8 months. She nodded. "You've done good work. He's scared, but he trusts enough to come forward. That's you." A pause. "He just needs someone willing to wait." Cole looked at the horse. Then he picked up his pliers and went back to the latch. But something she'd said sat in the back of his mind for the rest of the afternoon. Quiet and persistent. The way certain things do when they're not just about the horse. The books were worse than Cole had told her. She sat at the kitchen table on the 4th evening with his files spread around her and a look on her face that was making a serious effort to remain neutral and not quite succeeding. "Okay," she said, and the word was doing heavy lifting again. "When did you last reconcile these accounts?" "Reconcile," he repeated. She looked up at him. "Right," she said. "Okay. When did you last look at these?" He thought about it honestly. "February. It's October." "I know what month it is." She pressed her lips together, looked back at the papers. He could see her making decisions about which battles to pick. "Your equipment loan has a balloon payment coming up in 60 days, she said. "Did you know that?" The word balloon was doing something very unpleasant in Cole's chest. "I knew it was coming," he said carefully. "I thought I had more time." "By how much?" 90 days. Cole. She said his name the way people say a name when they're being very careful not to say what they're actually thinking. "You're 60 days out from a payment that's going to require—" She looked at the number on the page, then looked at him. "Do you have this?" He said nothing. That was its own answer. Emily sat back in her chair. She looked at the ceiling briefly. Then she looked at him with an expression that was not pity. He would have left the room for pity. But was something more practical and more useful than that. "All right," she said. "Tell me everything about the operation. What comes in, what goes out, what you've got that generates income, and what you've got that eats it." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," she said, cutting him off cleanly and without heat. "I have a business degree I've never actually used for anything useful. My mother spent money. She didn't have to send me to school for 3 years, and I spent most of those years finding horses to work with instead of going to class. And somehow I still passed because I read everything and retained it. And the one thing I am genuinely good at, that has nothing to do with animals, is understanding where money is going and why. She paused. So tell me. Or don't. But if you don't, you've got 60 days and no plan. He looked at her. She looked back. He pulled a chair out and sat down across from her. He told her everything. It took 2 hours. It was not comfortable. Cole Harrison was not a man accustomed to showing someone the underside of things, the places where the structure was weaker than it looked, the numbers that had gotten away from him during the years when getting out of bed was already taking everything he had. She asked questions that were direct and sometimes sharp, and she wrote things down on a legal pad she'd found somewhere, and she did not once make him feel stupid or small, which was something he'd been braced for and didn't know what to do with when it didn't come. You can make the payment, she said finally, looking at the legal pad. If you sell the breeding rights to Reckless this season, you've been sitting on that horse like he's a pet. He's a quarter horse with documented lineage going back. I know what he is. I looked him up. I looked him all the way up. She tapped the pad with her pen. There are 3 breeding operations within 200 miles that would pay significantly for access to him. You've just never made the calls. Cole was quiet for a moment. I don't like making calls, he said. I've noticed. She said it without cruelty, just fact. I'll make them. He looked at her. Why? He said. The question was blunt and real. She met his eyes. Because you fed me eggs. Because you told me the truth about grief. She picked up the pen again. And because this ranch is worth saving. It's obvious. You just can't see it because you've been standing too close to it for too long. Cole said nothing for a long moment. Then he pushed his chair back and stood up. Coffee? He said. Yes, she said, already looking back at the legal pad. He made a full pot. For the first time in 2 years. She made the calls. All 3 of them. 2 days later, standing at his kitchen counter with his landline in one hand and her legal pad in the other, speaking in a voice that was confident and knowledgeable, and nothing like the woman who had stood at his fence line with her arms wrapped around herself a week earlier. Cole stood in the doorway of the kitchen and listened, and felt something complicated and unwelcome moving around in his chest. By the end of the week, she had a verbal agreement from a ranch outside Bozeman that covered the balloon payment with room left over. Cole stood in the kitchen when she told him, and he didn't know what to do with his face, which had apparently forgotten how to arrange itself for good news. That's done then, he said. That part? Yes. She was already looking at the list. The east pasture fence is a bigger problem than you told me. I told you it needed work. You told me it needed looking at. 3 sections are down. That's not looking at, that's replacing. She looked up. Can you do it before the ground freezes hard? Maybe if I had help. She looked at him steadily. After breakfast, she said. They worked the fence together for 3 days. It was the kind of work that didn't leave room for pretending. Stretching wire, driving posts. The physical difficulty of it, stripping everything else away, and leaving just the task and the person working beside you. Cole learned things about Emily Carter during those 3 days that she didn't tell him directly, because she was not someone who told things directly. She was someone who revealed things through action, the way certain people do when they've learned that words can be used against them. He learned that she worked until she was done. Not until she was tired, until it was done. He learned that she had a ferocious temper with equipment that didn't cooperate, but was endlessly patient with anything living. He learned that she sang under her breath sometimes when she thought he was far enough away not to hear. Old country songs. Not the new kind. The older kind. The kind his own mother had listened to. He didn't tell her he could hear. He learned that she had a scar on her left forearm that she didn't explain and that he didn't ask about, which was its own kind of truce. He learned that she ate slowly and deliberately and never wasted food, the habit of someone who had gone without at some point and hadn't entirely lost the memory of it. And he learned, on the 3rd day, when the last post was set, and they were both leaning on the truck, exhausted, and she was making a sound that was half laugh and half groan and rubbing her shoulder, that when Emily Carter actually laughed, not the controlled version. It was a disruptive, unguarded thing that seemed to surprise even her. He heard it and felt something break open somewhere in his chest and immediately tried to close it. He wasn't quick enough.
Ciao.
The problem started on a Thursday. Cole needed to go into Ridgecrest for supplies. Emily came along, not because she asked, but because she had a list of things she needed that were her own business, and he was going anyway. He knew when he walked into Teller's Hardware that Dale Marsh was going to say something. Dale Marsh always said something. He was 60 years old and had lived in Ridgecrest his entire life and knew everything about everyone, or at least knew enough to keep talking as if he did. "Cole Harrison," Dale said, leaning on the counter with an expression that was friendly in the way that a fishing hook is friendly. "Heard you've got someone staying out at the place." Cole set his list on the counter. "I need 300 feet of 12-gauge wire," he said. "Word travels fast in a small town," Dale said. "Young woman, people are saying. Blonde, nice looking." He said it with the tone of someone delivering what they believe is a compliment and waiting for acknowledgement. Cole looked at him levelly. "The wire," he said. Dale held the eye contact for one more moment, then went to find the wire. Emily was at the other end of the store. Cole was aware of her without looking at her. He knew the second she heard, because the store was small, because Dale was not quiet, because there was another man at the counter who had gone very still in the careful way of a person who is pretending not to listen while absolutely listening. She kept shopping. She didn't change her posture, didn't speed up, picked up a tube of wound care for animals, and checked the label the same way she had been doing it before she'd heard. Cole took that in and filed it somewhere. But outside, walking back to the truck, she was quiet in a way that was different from her usual quiet. Her jaw was set at an angle he hadn't seen before. "You don't have to explain me," she said abruptly, when they were a block from the truck. He looked at her. "I know. People are going to say what they're going to say." "Yes. It doesn't bother me." She said it the way people say things they're still deciding about. Cole stopped walking. She took 2 more steps before she noticed and stopped too, turned around. "It bothers you," he said. She looked at him. Something honest moved across her face, quick and unwilling. "I've had a version of this before," she said quietly, "where what people think about you becomes this thing that—" She stopped. "I just don't want it to be a problem for you, for the ranch, if people are talking." Cole looked at her steadily. "People in this town have been talking about me since Sarah died," he said. It was the first time he'd used her name in years. He heard himself do it and felt the cold shock of it, but kept going. "They've called me broken and strange and too damaged to be worth knowing, and I'm still standing and the ranch is still running, and what they say hasn't changed either one of those things by a single inch." Emily stood very still. "I'm not going to apologize for having help on my property," he said. "And you don't need to apologize for being there." She looked at him for a long moment. "Okay," she said. But something in her eyes told him this wasn't over, that it was going to circle back, that she was going to carry it in the particular way she carried things, inward, quietly, by herself, and that it was going to show up again when he wasn't expecting it. He recognized it because it was exactly what he did.
Char.
3 weeks in, one of the breeding agreement horses came in for a stay, a big warm blood from the Bozeman operation, there for 30 days while the deal ran its course. The horse arrived on a Tuesday with a handler Cole didn't know, a young man from the ranch named Pete, who was 23 and immediately, transparently, and helplessly taken with Emily within about 9 minutes of meeting her. Cole noticed. He noticed with the particular discomfort of someone who has no right to notice, but is noticing anyway, and is angry at himself for it. Pete kept finding reasons to ask Emily questions. About the horse, about the feed schedule, about the property. He laughed at the wrong times, and his laugh was too loud, and he stood a half step closer to her than the conversation required. Emily was polite. She was clear. She answered his questions and moved on, and did not give him an inch he hadn't earned, and Cole watched this from across the barn and told himself he was making sure the horse was settling in correctly. He was not making sure the horse was settling in correctly. Grit came and sat next to Cole's leg and looked up at him with an expression that Cole chose to interpret as neutral. "I'm fine," Cole said quietly. Grit looked back at Pete. "I know," Cole said. He walked out of the barn. He went to the fence line and started checking wire. He'd already checked that morning and did not think about the fact that Emily's laugh had carried across the barn when Pete said something at the water bucket, and he had felt the sound like something physical in the center of his chest. That evening, after Pete had gone back to the bunkhouse they'd set up for the term of the stay, Emily found Cole on the porch. She sat down on the top step without asking, which she'd started doing and which he'd stopped reacting to. "He's harmless," she said. Cole said nothing. "Pete," she clarified, as if he needed it. "I know," Cole said. She looked at him sideways. "You were counting fence posts in there for 20 minutes, she said. "Those posts are fine. You replaced them 3 days ago." He said nothing. "Cole." He looked at her. She was looking at him with the direct, patient, undefended expression that he had come to understand was her real face, the one underneath the carefully controlled versions she wore around people she didn't trust yet. "I'm not interested in Pete," she said plainly. He should have said something neutral. He should have said something that acknowledged the statement without responding to the thing underneath it, the thing that both of them were circling at a careful distance. He said, "Okay." Not the way she said it. The way he said it was different. Heavier. She heard the difference. He could tell she heard it because she looked back at the dark and her jaw softened just slightly, and neither of them said anything else for a long time. But she didn't go inside. And he didn't either. They sat on the porch together in the cold Montana night, not talking, not looking at each other, and the distance between them on those 2 porch steps was about 14 inches, and Cole was aware of every one of them. How was aware of them? The way you're aware of a thing you're trying not to want. The way you're aware of a door you've locked from the inside and hidden the key to and told yourself 100 times is locked for good reason, and the reason is real and the reason is true. And then you find yourself standing at it with your hand on the knob anyway, in the dark, not knowing when you got there. He didn't move. He sat with his hands on his knees and the cold on his face and the particular awareness of her there beside him, and he breathed, and he did not open the door. But he didn't walk away from it either. That was new. The letter came on a Wednesday. Cole almost didn't open it. It was in a business envelope, the kind with a logo he didn't immediately recognize, from a law firm out of Billings. He set it on the kitchen table and looked at it for 20 minutes before Emily came in from the paddock and saw it, and then saw his face. "What is it?" she asked. "Don't know yet." She washed her hands at the sink, came and stood near the table without sitting. "Do you want me to?" "No." He picked it up, opened it. He read it once. Then he set it down on the table and sat back and looked at the ceiling in the specific way of a person who has just been hit hard and is deciding whether to fall down. Cole. He slid the letter across the table to her without speaking. She picked it up and read it. He watched her face change as she went through it. A tightening around the eyes. A small movement in her jaw. She read it twice. "Callaway Development," she said. He said nothing. "They're claiming the east 20 acres is under a historical easement. They're now asserting to build an access road to the parcel they bought last spring." She set the letter down. "This is not a casual claim, Cole. They've got an attorney on this. They've been planning it." "I know what it is," he said. "Do you have documentation on the property lines? The original deed, the survey, anything that goes back to your grandfather's time?" He looked at her. "There might be something in the attic," he said. "I haven't. I don't go up there." She looked at him with a question she didn't ask. He saw her choose not to ask it. "Okay," she said. "Can we get up there today?" He stood up. He took her to the attic. He hadn't been up there since the year Sarah died. The boxes were Sarah's, some of them. Her handwriting was on the sides. He walked to the far end and started looking at his family's boxes, and he breathed very carefully and steadily, and Emily stayed near the stairs and went through the boxes he pointed her toward without going near the other ones. He would remember that later. That she didn't go near the other ones. It took 40 minutes to find the survey document. It was in a tube inside a flat box that was under 2 other boxes, and Emily held it up with a quiet, "Here," and passed it to him. He opened it on the kitchen table. She was right there beside him, her shoulder 2 inches from his, looking at the document with a focused attention that was entirely about the problem and not about anything else. "There," she said, pointing. "That eastern line is fixed and has been since 1947. The easement they're claiming would have had to have been recorded before that, and if it had been, it would be on this document." Cole leaned over the survey. "It's not on here," he said. "No," she said. "It is not." He straightened up. He looked at her. "They're lying," he said. "They're gambling," she corrected. "They're gambling. You don't have this document, or don't know what you're looking at, or can't afford to fight it." She looked at him steadily. "They're wrong on all 3 counts." Something moved through Cole's chest. It was not warm. It was too sharp for warm. It was the specific feeling of a man who has been pushed, who has spent years being too tired and too alone to push back, and who is discovering that he is not, in fact, too tired anymore. "I need to call a lawyer," he said. "Yes," Emily said. "I know one in Billings, a good one. She handles land disputes." She paused. "I can make the call." He looked at her. "Why do you know a land dispute lawyer?" he said. Something flickered in her expression. Brief, but there. "Because I've needed one before," she said quietly. "Not for land." He held her gaze for a moment. He did not push it. "Make the call," he said. She picked up the phone, and Cole Harrison stood in his kitchen with his grandfather's survey spread open on the table and watched a woman he had known for 3 weeks begin fighting for his home with the focused, unflinching energy of someone fighting for something that mattered to them. Not because they'd been asked to, not because they owed anything, but because it was right and it needed doing. He put his hand flat on the survey, on his grandfather's lines, on the land that was his, that had always been his, that someone wanted to take away from him. He was not going to let that happen. And for the first time in 6 years, the word "we" had arrived in his life. Quietly, through a side door he hadn't known was still there, and he found that he didn't know how to make it leave. He wasn't entirely sure he wanted to. The lawyer's name was Rebecca Holt, and she was exactly the kind of person Cole would never have found on his own. Direct, sharp, with the particular confidence of someone who had spent 15 years winning fights that other people had already given up on. She drove out to the ranch on a Friday, looked at the survey document for 11 minutes, and then looked up at Cole with an expression that was not quite a smile, but was in that neighborhood. "They knew this easement claim was thin when they filed it," she said. "This is a pressure play. They're betting you'll settle rather than fight." "I'm not settling," Cole said. "Good," she said. "Because if you fight it, you'll win. The documentation is clean. The original deed is clear. What they're claiming would require a recorded easement that predates your grandfather's purchase, and there isn't one." She set the survey down. "I need copies of everything. I'll have a response to their attorney by next Wednesday." Cole nodded. Emily was at the table, the legal pad in front of her, writing things down. She had been the one to send Rebecca the documents in advance, to organize the timeline, to prepare the chain of ownership going back 4 generations. When Rebecca had walked in and seen the folder already prepared and labeled and organized, she'd looked at Emily and said, "You've done this before." And Emily had said, "Something like it," and left it there. After Rebecca left, Cole stood at the table and looked at the folder, looked at the labeled tabs and the organized dates and 6 years of neglected paperwork that had somehow been assembled into a coherent defense of his land in the space of 3 days. "Thank you," he said. Emily was already cleaning up the table. She paused when he said it. Didn't turn around immediately. "She's good," Emily said. "You're going to win this." "I'm not talking about Rebecca," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she turned around. Her expression was careful, not closed, but careful, the way she looked when something mattered, and she wasn't sure what to do with that. "You don't have to thank me for this," she said. "I know I don't have to," he said, and she heard her own words from 3 weeks ago come back in his voice, and something in her face shifted. "Cole?" "I know," he said. He picked up his hat from the hook. "I know what I'm doing." I didn't say anything else. He walked outside. But she stood at the kitchen table for a long moment after he left, one hand on the folder, and she was not entirely steady. The town talked more once the legal battle became known. Small towns always know when something is being contested, the way a family always knows when there's tension in a room, even if no one said anything yet. By the second week of November, Cole could walk into any business in Ridgecrest and feel the particular texture of being watched by people who were deciding what they thought about you. He was used to being watched. He was not used to Emily being watched alongside him. It happened at the feed store, on a morning when they'd come in together because the order was large enough to need 2 sets of hands for loading. Cole was at the counter settling the order when he heard it. 2 women near the back, voices low but not low enough. The way women talk in small towns when they want to be heard but not caught hearing. Living out there with him, alone, for weeks now. Well, you know how men like that are when they get lonely enough. Poor thing probably doesn't know any better. No family, no roots, she just drifted in. Cole went very still. He heard Emily go still too, somewhere behind him. He didn't turn around. He finished the transaction. He signed the slip. He picked up his copy. He turned around, and Emily was standing 5 feet away, with a 50-pound bag of mineral supplement held against her chest, like she'd forgotten she was holding it. And her face was perfectly composed, except for 2 spots of color high on her cheeks that weren't from the cold. He walked over and took the bag from her. "Ready?" he said. "Ready," she said. They loaded the truck in silence. Cole drove. Emily sat with her elbow on the window and her face turned slightly away. He could see the tension in her jaw from where he was. He drove for 4 minutes without saying anything. Then he said, "Those women have been talking about everyone in this valley for 30 years. They talked about my father when he drank. They talked about my grandfather when he argued with the county over his water rights. They talked about me when Sarah—" He stopped. Reset. They talk. It doesn't change the land or the fences or the horses or anything that's real. Emily said nothing for a moment. "It changes how people see you," she said quietly. "It follows you. So does the truth," he said. She turned and looked at him. He was looking at the road. "That's easy to say when you don't need anything from these people," she said. "You've got land. You've got a history here. You've got roots that go back to your grandfather and everyone knows it. She stopped. "You're what?" he said. She looked back out the window. Nobody here. A woman living in a man's house who nobody knows anything about. That's what they see. Cole's hands tightened on the wheel. He turned into the ranch road and stopped the truck at the gate, engine running. "You are not nobody," he said. His voice came out lower than he expected, more certain. "You are the person who saved the Bozeman deal and fought for my east pasture and kept my books from going off a cliff and midwifed a foal at 3 in the morning." He paused. "Let that sit. That's not nothing. That's not nobody." She turned to look at him, and he made the mistake of looking back. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. That look. But in those 3 seconds, something that had been carefully, slowly building for 6 weeks between them something that had been carefully, slowly building for 6 weeks between them became impossible to pretend wasn't there. He could see her seeing it. He could feel himself seeing it. He looked back at the road. He drove through the gate. Neither of them mentioned it, but it was there now, fully out in the open. Not named, not spoken, not acted on, but there, permanent and undeniable, the way something becomes when 2 honest people have seen the same truth at the same moment, and both pretended to look away. It was a Tuesday night when everything that Cole had been holding in finally cracked. The season had shifted hard into winter. The cold was serious now, the kind that had purpose in it, and the days were shorter, and the work didn't get shorter with them. And Cole was running on 5 hours of sleep and the specific low-grade exhaustion of a man who is trying to hold too many things at once. He had started to allow himself something he hadn't in years. Small things. The full pot of coffee in the morning. Leaving the radio on in the barn sometimes instead of working in silence. Sitting at the dinner table instead of the counter. Small adjustments, each one the size of a door opening a 1/4 inch. and each one terrifying in proportion to its size. That Tuesday night, Emily was reading at the kitchen table, and Cole was going through feed calculations, and the house was quiet in the new way. Not empty, not heavy, but quiet the way a house is quiet when there are two people in it who are comfortable not talking. His phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, but it was a Billings area code, and anything Billings right now was the lawsuit, so he picked up. The voice on the other end was male, smooth, the kind of smooth that's been practiced until it sounds natural. "Mr. Harrison, my name is Gerald Calloway. I believe your attorney has been corresponding with mine." Cole said nothing. "I was hoping," the man continued pleasantly, like they were having a completely different conversation, "that we could speak directly, man to man, without the lawyers in the middle creating expenses for everyone." "I'm listening," Cole said, flat. Across the table, Emily looked up from her book. "I want you to understand that this situation doesn't need to be adversarial," Calloway said. "The development project I'm working on is going to bring real economic benefit to this valley. Jobs, infrastructure, money moving through these communities." A pause. "I'm a reasonable man. I'm willing to make you a very fair offer for a right-of-way access across that eastern parcel. We're not asking for ownership, just access." "No," Cole said. A beat. "Mr. Harrison, I'd encourage you to think carefully before—" "I've thought carefully," Cole said. "The answer is no. My attorney will be in contact." He hung up. He set the phone on the table. He sat there. Emily was watching him. "Calloway called personally," he said. Her eyes sharpened. "That's not normal. If he's calling personally, he's worried. Or he's escalating. Or both," she said. Cole looked at the phone. "He's not going to stop," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," Emily said quietly. "Men like that don't stop at the first no. The first no is just information to them. It tells them what kind of pressure to use next." She paused. "Cole, we need to make sure Rebecca has everything. Every document, every piece of historical record, anything he could use to find a gap. We've given her everything." "Everything you know about," Emily said carefully. He looked at her. "Is there anything else?" she asked. "Anything your father might have signed, anything informal, any handshake deal that got written down somewhere." "My father signed things he shouldn't have," Cole said. The words came out harder than he intended. "When he was drinking. There were 2 years where I wasn't watching closely enough and he—" He stopped. His jaw was tight. Emily sat very still. She did not push. "There might be something," he said. "I don't know. I need to look." "Okay," she said. "Not tonight," he said. "Okay," she said again. He stood up and went and stood at the window and looked at the dark. She went back to her book. She didn't watch him. Didn't hover. Didn't fill the silence with comfort he hadn't asked for. She just let him be in the room with it. And that specific thing, that respect for the shape of his pain without trying to rearrange it, was the thing that undid him more than anything else had. His hands, on the window frame, were shaking slightly. He hadn't noticed when that started. They found it. It was 4 days later, in the bottom of a box that Cole had moved from the basement to the attic to the basement again, without ever opening, because it was his father's handwriting on the side, and his father's handwriting had always done something to his chest he couldn't afford. It was a letter of intent, dated 2003. Cole would have been 15. His father, in the specific, careless cursive of a man who believed optimism was a substitute for paperwork, had written a letter indicating his willingness to consider access arrangements for a parcel of land that was subsequently developed and sold twice over and eventually purchased by Gerald Calloway's holding company. It was not a contract. It was not a deed. It was not legally binding by any modern standard, as Rebecca confirmed in a phone call 20 minutes after Cole photographed it and sent it to her. "This is unenforceable," Rebecca said. "A letter of intent from 2003 with no notarization, no witnesses listed, no subsequent formalization. Their attorney will know that too, which means someone showed it to Calloway, and he's gambling. I don't know that it doesn't hold up," Cole said. "Exactly," Rebecca said. He's built his whole strategy on the chance that you'll see your father's signature and think it's legitimate and settle. Once we disclose that we have it and we know its limitations, his case collapses." Cole thanked her and hung up. He was sitting on the floor of the basement with the letter in his hand. Emily was at the top of the stairs. She'd heard the call. "You okay?" she asked. He looked at the letter, at his father's handwriting, at the particular way his father had signed his name, the oversized H, the trailing scrawl of Arison, with the casual confidence of a man who didn't believe consequences applied to him. "My father was not a careful man," Cole said. Emily didn't say anything. "He loved this land," Cole said. "He just loved it the way some people love things, so sure it would always be there that he never thought about protecting it." His voice was even, quiet. "I've been cleaning up his messes for 20 years. "I know," Emily said softly. He looked up at her. "That's why it matters so much," she said. "That's why you can't let them take it." She came down the stairs and sat on the bottom step, not close enough to crowd him, just close enough to be present. "The land is yours, Cole. You earned it in ways your father never had to, and they're not going to take it." He looked at her on the bottom step. Her face was open and certain in a way that was not performed. She believed what she was saying. She meant it. Her certainty about his land was as genuine as her certainty about Gunsmoke, about the foal, about the balloon payment. She looked at things that were broken and saw the working version underneath, and she fought for the working version like it was already real. He didn't know how she did that. I didn't know how someone who had been made to feel small for 4 years and had lost her job and her direction and driven up into a stranger's life during a storm still managed to look at the world that way. He wanted to ask her. He didn't. He stood up, folded the letter carefully. "I'll send this to Rebecca," he said. "I already photographed it," Emily said. "Sent it from my phone while you were on the call." He looked at her. She looked back, completely straightforward. "Of course you did," he said. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, Cole Harrison smiled. Not a lot. Not the big open kind. Just a small, private, involuntary upward movement at the corner of his mouth that he didn't catch in time to stop. She saw it. Her own expression did something quiet and warm in response. Neither of them acknowledged it. But it sat in the room with them, small and new and extraordinarily fragile, like the first shoot of something green after a hard winter. It was Grit who gave it away in the end. Cole came back from the north fence one afternoon to find Grit asleep with his head in Emily's lap at the kitchen table, and Emily sitting perfectly still with one hand resting on the dog's side, not wanting to disturb him, reading her book at an awkward angle to avoid moving. She looked up when Cole came in. "He just did it," she said, a little defensively. "I didn't invite him up." Cole looked at his dog, who was profoundly and contentedly unconscious in a woman's lap, and felt something so warm and helpless move through him that it almost buckled his knees. "He's never done that," Cole said. "With anyone." Emily looked down at Grit. Something moved in her face, something that was not entirely about the dog. "He's a good judge," she said softly. Cole stood in the doorway with the cold still on his coat and looked at the woman at his kitchen table with his dog in her lap, and the afternoon light coming through the window, and the whole scene was so quietly, unexpectedly beautiful that it hurt. He turned and went to hang up his coat. He stood with his back to the room for a moment, facing the wall. He was in trouble. I knew it with the same certainty. He knew fence work and weather patterns, and the particular sound a horse makes when something is wrong. The certainty of a man whose body has stopped lying to him even when his mind tries to. I was in trouble, and he had been in trouble for weeks, and there was nothing to do about it except keep moving forward, the way he had always kept moving forward. One day at a time, one task at a time, without looking too far ahead at the thing he was afraid to see clearly. The night Calloway's men came to the property, it was just after 10 o'clock. Cole heard the trucks first. He was a light sleeper, had been for years, and the sound of vehicles on the ranch road at 10 on a Tuesday in November was not right, and he knew it was not right before he was fully awake. He was at the window in seconds. 3 trucks. Not law enforcement. Just trucks, the big kind, with the Callaway Development logo on the doors. 4 men getting out, moving toward the east pasture fence. Cole was dressed and out the door in under a minute. He heard Emily's door open behind him. "Stay inside," he said sharply. "Absolutely not," she said, and was right behind him. He didn't have time to argue. He crossed the yard and came around the side of the barn and put himself between the 4 men and the fence, and he was aware that he was one person and they were 4, and that 2 of them were significantly larger than him, and that he was, in this moment, operating on pure iron and no plan. "You're on private property," he said. His voice was very steady. "You need to leave." The man in front was not large, but he had the specific energy of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted through means other than his own physical presence. He was in his 50s. He had the kind of expensive casual that reads as money at rest. He looked at Cole with a calculation that was barely even insulted by having to look. "Mr. Harrison," he said, "I'm not here for trouble. I just want you to see something." He gestured toward the fence line, toward the east pasture. "We've had surveyors out this week. The boundary is not where you think it is." "My boundary is where my grandfather put it in 1947, and my attorney has the documentation," Cole said. "And you have 30 seconds to get off my land before I call the sheriff." The man smiled. "Now see, we both know the sheriff gets here in about 40 minutes out here, and a lot can happen in 40 minutes. Cole went very still. He heard, in the silence that followed, a sound from the road, a sound that got louder. The low, particular rumble of motorcycles. Not 1 or 2, but a group of them, slowing, turning into his road. The man in front heard it too. His smile shifted. Headlights. 7 of them. 7 bikes pulling up and stopping, and the engines cutting one by one, and men getting off those bikes with the slow, deliberate ease of people who are never in a hurry because they don't have to be. Cole had met Hank Dearborn 3 years ago at a cattle auction. He was 54 years old, broadly built, with a quiet that was nothing like Cole's quiet. Where Cole's quiet was solitary, Hank's was territorial. He was the kind of man who people made room for without being asked. He had lost his own family ranch to a bad loan at 31 and had never forgotten what that felt like, or who had done it to him. He walked up and stood beside Cole without a word. The other men spread naturally into a line. Callaway's man looked at the bikes, looked at the men, did a very fast, very visible recalculation. "This is a legal matter," he said, and his voice had lost something it had had 30 seconds ago. "Sure is," Hank said pleasantly. "And until it's resolved legally, these men are on private property belonging to Cole Harrison, and you are not. So I'd move along." The 4 men from the trucks looked at each other. They moved along. Cole stood and listened to the trucks reverse down the road, and he breathed, and he did not let himself shake until they were completely out of earshot. Then he turned to Hank. "How did you know?" he said. "Dale at the hardware store's got a big mouth," Hank said. "Been hearing things. Wanted to make sure you weren't alone out here when they got impatient." He looked at Cole steadily. "You should have called, you know, years ago, for any of it." Cole said nothing. Emily had appeared at his left shoulder. She had stayed close throughout the whole thing. He was aware that she had not moved behind him, had not retreated, had stayed exactly where she could see everything and be seen. Hank looked at her, then at Cole. Then he had the grace to say nothing about what his face very clearly thought. "Get some sleep," Hank said. "We'll be parked at the road tonight." Cole looked at him. "Hank," he said. "I know," Hank said. He walked back toward the bikes. Cole stood in the dark after they were gone. Emily was still beside him. "You okay?" she asked. "Yes," he said. She waited. "No," he said. She said nothing. She just stood there, exactly the right distance away, close enough to feel present, far enough to give him the room he needed to be whatever he was. He put his hands on his knees and bent slightly forward and breathed. "They were going to tear out the fence," he said. His voice was low and controlled, and underneath that control was something very raw. "They were going to come onto my grandfather's land and tear out his fence and move the line, and by morning it would have been a fact on the ground, and the legal battle would have shifted. He stopped. They were banking on me being alone. "You're not alone," Emily said quietly. He straightened up, looked at her. She was looking back at him with that open, direct, undefended expression, and in the dark and the cold and the aftermath of everything, with his hands still not entirely steady and the adrenaline still moving through him like a current, Cole Harrison reached the end of 6 years of careful, deliberate distance and stood there at the edge of it and looked across. "Emily," he said. Her breath changed slightly. He heard it. "Cole," she said carefully. "I need to say something," he said. "And I don't know how to say it right because I've spent a long time not saying things." She was very still. "I know what this is," he said. He meant it simply, plainly, the way he said everything. "What I feel. I know what it is, and I know when it started, and I know I'm standing here tonight, and you're the reason I'm not doing this alone, and I don't—" He stopped, his jaw tightened. "I don't know what to do with that." She looked at him. Her eyes were very bright. "I don't know either," she said, and it came out honest and a little frightened and completely real. "I'm not ready," he said. "I need you to know that. I don't know if I know how anymore." "I'm not ready either," she said quietly. "I came here running away from something, and I don't trust my own—" She stopped. "I don't trust that I'm seeing things clearly yet." He nodded once. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. They stood there in the dark, having just told each other the truth and done nothing about it, which was the most honest thing either of them had done in a very long time. Then she said, "You should sleep." "You too," he said. She turned toward the house. He followed, a step behind. At the door, she stopped and turned and looked at him, and her expression was complicated and honest and a little bit wrecked and more alive than anything he'd seen in years. "Cole," she said, "for what it's worth." A pause. "I stopped running the day I agreed to stay." She went inside. He stood at the door for a long moment. The motorcycles were quiet at the end of the road. Hank and his men keeping watch. The horses shifting in the barn. Grit, probably on his mat, or possibly back on Emily's feet. His grandfather's land, all 700 acres of it, still exactly where it had always been. And Cole Harrison, standing at the door of the house he had built his life around protecting, feeling for the first time in 6 years, like he was protecting something more than land. He pressed his hand flat against the doorframe. He breathed. He went inside. The morning after Calloway's men came to the property, Cole woke up at 4:30 and lay in the dark for a full 10 minutes without moving, which was unusual for him. He was a man who got up when he woke up. Lying still had always felt like conceding something to the day. But this morning, he lay there and listened to the house and let himself do the thing he almost never allowed. He let himself take inventory of what was true. What was true was that 7 men had parked at the end of his road last night and kept watch so he didn't have to do it alone. What was true was that a woman had stayed on his land for 6 weeks and fought for it with the ferocity of someone who had decided it mattered. What was true was that he had stood in the dark with that woman and said something honest, and she had said something honest back, and neither of them had run from it. And what was true, underneath all of that, was the thing he had been most carefully avoiding for 6 years. The truth that he had been doing penance. Not for something anyone else had decided he owed, but for something he'd decided himself. In the weeks after Sarah died, when grief had calcified into a belief so deep he'd stopped questioning it. The belief that he should have been there. That if he'd been home that night instead of working the north fence line, she wouldn't have been driving alone on that road in the ice, wouldn't have hit the patch that sent the truck over the embankment, wouldn't have been gone by the time anyone found her. He had never said this to anyone. Not one person in 6 years. He had carried it the way you carry a stone that gets heavier the longer you hold it. And by now it was so heavy he'd stopped noticing the weight because the weight had become the only thing he knew. He got up at 4:40. He made coffee. Full pot. He stood at the counter and drank the first cup in the dark and thought about what Emily had said the night before. Not the last thing. Not the thing about stopping running. The thing before that. When he'd told her he didn't know if he knew how to love someone anymore, and she'd said, "I don't trust that I'm seeing things clearly yet." She had said it the way someone says something that's already cost them something to admit. And he understood, in the way he was beginning to understand things about her that she didn't say directly, that she was not talking only about him. She was talking about herself. About the 4 years in Denver that had made her distrust her own judgment. About the man who had made her feel like too much and not enough at the same time, until she was so confused about her own value that she'd had to physically leave the state to start believing herself again. She wasn't broken. He could see that clearly. But she was still putting herself back together, the same way he was, and the parallel of it was something he could not look at directly without it hitting him somewhere that was not fully armored. He was on his second cup when he heard her door. She came into the kitchen already dressed, which told him she hadn't slept much either. She looked at the coffee pot, looked at him. "You made a full pot," she said. "Seemed like a two-person morning," he said. She poured herself a mug and stood at the counter across from him, and they drank their coffee in the early dark and didn't say anything for a while, and it was the most companionable silence Cole had experienced in recent memory, which was itself an entire problem. "Rebecca called last night after everything," Emily said finally, "while you were talking to Hank. She got the preliminary response from Calloway's attorney." Cole looked at her. "They're pulling back the easement claim," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "They know they can't win it," she said. "Rebecca said their attorney was already softening the language 2 days ago. After we disclosed the letter of intent and the documentation proving it was unenforceable, they had nothing." She paused. "It's not over officially until the paperwork, but it's over." Cole set his mug down on the counter. He put both hands flat on the counter and looked at the surface and breathed once, slowly. 6 weeks. 6 weeks of that weight, on top of 6 years of the other weight, and now one piece of it was lifting, and he hadn't known until this moment how much space it had been taking up. "Cole," Emily said quietly. He looked up. She was watching him with an expression he had come to recognize, that particular combination of care and restraint, where she wanted to come toward him and was holding herself back because she was not sure he wanted her to. "Come here," he said. The words came out before he'd decided to say them. She crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, and he pulled her into a hug that was nothing like the careful, measured interactions of the past 6 weeks. It was a real one, both arms, the kind where you're not thinking about how it looks, but only about the fact that another person is real and solid and present, and you needed that more than you'd admitted. She hugged him back. Hard. Her arms went around him, and she held on with the same ferocity she brought to everything. And for a moment, they just stood there in his kitchen at 4:40 in the morning and breathed. He let go first, stepped back. She looked up at him. Her eyes were bright. He cleared his throat. "Good news deserves coffee," he said, and picked up his mug. She laughed. Not the controlled version. The real one, sudden and bright and completely unguarded. And it filled the kitchen the same way it had filled the barn that one afternoon, and Cole felt the exact same thing he'd felt then, that helpless warmth in the center of his chest. He looked at his coffee. He was definitely in trouble. Rebecca made it official by the end of the week. Calloway Development withdrew the easement claim in writing, citing, as Rebecca put it in a voice that was trying not to be too satisfied, a reassessment of the historical documentation. The east 20 acres was Cole's, had always been Cole's, would remain Cole's. Cole drove into Ridgecrest alone that Friday. He went to Teller's Hardware. Dale Marsh was behind the counter. "Heard Calloway backed off," Dale said. "He did," Cole said. Dale nodded slowly. There was something different in his expression. Something that was close to respect, if Dale Marsh had been the kind of man who led with respect, instead of arriving at it after the fact. "Good," Dale said. "That land's been Harrison land since before half this town existed. Shouldn't have been any different." Cole looked at him. "The woman," Dale started. "Emily," Cole said. "Emily," Dale repeated, and at least had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. She was the one who found the old survey, I heard. She was, Cole said. She also organized the financial records, negotiated the breeding rights deal for Reckless, and kept this operation from going sideways while I was dealing with all of it. He held Dale's gaze. In case that's useful information for the next conversation that comes up. Dale was quiet for a moment. Fair enough, he said. Cole picked up his order and left. It was not a grand gesture. It was not a speech. But walking back to the truck, Cole felt something he hadn't in years. The particular alignment of a man who has said the true thing in the right place. Small, real, enough. He came home to find Emily in the paddock with Gunsmoke, not standing at the fence anymore, inside, moving slowly around the horse in easy circles, not pushing, not directing, just being present in a way that the big gray was following with his eyes and then with his feet, turning to keep her in view, taking one slow step and then another in her direction. Cole stopped at the fence. He watched. Gunsmoke walked all the way to her, put his nose against her shoulder, stood there. Emily went very still. She brought one hand up slowly and rested it against the horse's jaw, and she said something to him that Cole couldn't hear from where he was, and Gunsmoke closed his eyes. Cole's throat tightened. 8 months he'd been working with that horse. 8 months of careful, patient, slow rebuilding after what the previous owner had done. And the horse had never done that. Had never walked towards someone that way. Never offered that kind of contact without prompting. Emily stood with her hand on the big horse's jaw, and her eyes closed too. And Cole stood at the fence and felt the tightening in his throat move down into his chest and settle there, and he thought with sudden, unguarded clarity, she did that. She waited long enough and was honest enough, and the horse knew it and came to her. The same way Grit had, the same way he had. I didn't say anything. He just turned and went to start the evening work, and he breathed carefully, and he let the feeling be there without doing anything about it. Because he wasn't ready yet, and she wasn't ready yet, and ready wasn't a thing you could rush, but it was closer than it had been yesterday. December came in hard. The cold was serious and permanent now, the kind that settled into the ground and intended to stay. The work changed. More indoor maintenance, more attention to the water lines, more time in the barn, keeping everything moving that Cole tried to stop. They had developed a rhythm by now that Cole could not have explained to anyone who hadn't seen it, but that felt, in its daily texture, like something built rather than arrived at. She took mornings, starting the water checks and feeding while he handled the perimeter. He took evening heavy work, the feeding and the last check of everything, while she handled the books and whatever administrative thing needed attention. They ate together most nights. They talked when there was something to say. It was the most functional Cole had been in years, and that knowledge sat in him with a complex weight, gratitude, and underneath the gratitude, the specific fear of a man who has been given something he doesn't know how to keep. He was on the porch one evening, just back from the barn, when his phone rang. Number he didn't know. Out-of-state area code. He answered it. Cole Harrison? A woman's voice. Careful. Yes, he said. My name is Donna Carter. I'm Emily's mother. Cole went very still. I've been trying to reach her, the woman said. She sounded tired. Not angry. Tired. The specific exhaustion of a parent who has been worried for a long time. She doesn't always answer her phone. A friend of hers told me she was at a ranch in Montana, gave me this number. I hope that's all right. It's all right, Cole said. I'll get her. He went inside. Emily was at the table with the books. He said, Your mother, and held out the phone, and watched her face do 3 things very fast. Surprise, something that might have been guilt, and then a careful neutrality she put on top of both. She took the phone, said, Mom? Got up from the table and went down the hall. Cole sat down at the table. He did not listen. The house was not large enough to make that entirely possible. But he didn't put any effort toward hearing. He looked at the legal pad she'd been working on and the numbers she'd been running, and he thought about a woman named Donna Carter, who sounded tired and had been given his number by a friend because her daughter didn't always answer. Emily came back 12 minutes later. She set the phone on the table and sat down and looked at it. She okay? Cole asked. She's worried, Emily said. About me. She paused. She thinks I've run away. Have you? Cole asked. He said it quietly, without edge. Emily looked at him. She took her time with the answer. I thought I was, she said finally. When I left Denver, I was running. A pause. I don't know when that changed. Cole said nothing. He waited. She wants me to come home for Christmas, Emily said. She lives in Colorado. She has a house there. She's been there 30 years. She wants to make sure I'm... She stopped. She wants to see me. You should go, Cole said. Emily looked at him. It's 4 days, he said. I can manage 4 days. That's not... She stopped, started again. That's not what I was thinking about. What were you thinking about? He asked. She looked at the table. At the legal pad. At the numbers she'd been running that were not her numbers, that were his, that she had somehow taken complete ownership of over the past 7 weeks. I was thinking, she said carefully, about what it means that leaving for 4 days feels harder than leaving Denver for good did. Cole was very quiet. She looked up at him. That probably shouldn't be your problem, she said. It's not a problem, he said. Cole, Emily. He said her name the way she said his sometimes, with that careful wait. Go see your mother. Come back. He said it simply, like it was a complete sentence. Like come back wasn't the most loaded 2 words he'd said in 6 years. She heard it. He could tell she heard it because she went very still and her eyes did something that she immediately tried to contain, and she looked back at the table. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. They went back to work, but the 2 words were in the room with them, and both of them knew it. She left on the 22nd of December. He drove her to the bus station in Ridgecrest, which was not glamorous, but was what there was. She had a duffel bag and her jacket and the particular posture of someone trying not to make too much of a moment. At the station, she turned to him. The east water line sometimes freezes at the lower joint, she said. I put a note on the boiler. And Gunsmoke's been getting a handful of extra grain at night. I should have told you earlier. He needs... Emily, Cole said. She stopped. I know my own ranch, he said gently. She made a sound that was half laugh and half something else. I know you do, she said. She looked at him. Her bag was in her hand. The bus was boarding. 4 days. 4 days, he said. She looked at him for one more second with that open, unguarded expression that he knew was her real face. Then she turned and got on the bus. Cole drove home. He walked into the kitchen, and the house was the old kind of quiet. The weight and age quiet, the empty kind. And he stood in it and felt it and let himself understand what it meant that the difference was this immediate and this total. Grit put his chin on Cole's foot. Cole looked down at him. 4 days, he said. Grit was unimpressed. She called on the second night. He was in the barn, the late check, and he almost didn't get to the phone in time. Hey, she said. Hey, he said. He sat down on the feed bucket. How's the lower joint? Fine, he said. How's your mother? A pause. A soft exhale. Relieved. She cried when she saw me, which I was not prepared for. Another pause. She likes your ranch, by the way. I showed her pictures. Cole was quiet for a moment. You took pictures of the ranch? He said. I take pictures of the things I want to remember, she said, and said it so simply and without apparent awareness of the weight of it that he had to press his free hand against his knee and breathe. The foal doing okay? She asked. Chance is doing fine, he said. Growing fast. Good. A pause. Cole? Yeah. She asked me what I was doing there, at the ranch. My mother. A pause. I didn't know how to answer her. He said nothing for a moment. What did you say? He asked. I said I was helping someone who needed it, and it turned into something I didn't expect. A long pause. She asked me if I was happy. Cole sat very still on the feed bucket. What did you say? He asked again. I said yes, she said. Quiet, direct, The way she said true things. I said yes, and I didn't. I didn't feel uncertain about it when I said it, which surprised me. Cole pressed his hand harder against his knee. Good, he said. His voice came out rougher than he wanted. Yeah, she said softly. Good. They stayed on the phone for another 20 minutes without saying very much. He told her about the horses. She told him about her mother's house, and the way Colorado felt different than she'd remembered. Smaller somehow, like a coat that used to fit. He listened to her voice in the dark barn, with the horses settling around him and grit on the barn floor, and he thought, this is a thing a person can need. He thought, I have been needing this for a long time and not knowing what to call it. She came back on the 26th. He was at the station before the bus arrived. He told himself it was practical. She had a bag, the roads were icy, it made sense to be early. When she came off the bus and saw him standing there, something happened to her expression that she didn't fully control. A quick, bright opening, like a window in a dark room. You're early, she said. Roads are icy, he said. She looked at him for a half-second longer than the sentence required. Right, she said. He took her bag. She let him. They drove back to the ranch and talked about her mother and Christmas and the bus ride, and Grit met them at the door with a level of enthusiasm that was frankly embarrassing for an animal of his dignity, and Emily crouched down and accepted his greeting with both hands and said, I missed you too, baby, in a voice that was so warm and unguarded that Cole had to turn around and deal with his coat for slightly longer than necessary. She went to her room. He went to the barn. He stood in the barn and put his forehead briefly against Reckless's neck and breathed. He was going to have to do something about this. He didn't know what yet. But the knowing was building in him with the patient, inexorable certainty of groundwater rising, slow, invisible, and eventually unavoidable. The twist came 10 days later, and it came from a direction he never anticipated. It came from Emily herself. He found it by accident, which was the worst way to find something that was going to change everything. He wasn't looking. He was in the barn early, looking for the farrier invoice he thought he'd left on the tackroom shelf, and the shelf was a communal workspace now, organized by Emily's particular system, which he had mostly learned to navigate. The invoice wasn't there, but a folder was. A manila folder, neatly labeled, which had slipped between the wall and the shelf edge, and which he pulled out thinking it might be filed paperwork. He opened it. It was a job listing, printed. 3 of them, clipped together. A large animal veterinary clinic in Missoula, Montana. A ranch management position in Wyoming. A horse rescue operation in Oregon. All 3 listings were dated from the past month. Cole stood in the tack room with the folder in his hand and felt the floor shift under him in a way that had nothing to do with the ground. She had been looking. She had been researching. She had been preparing, quietly, privately, on her own time, without saying a word, to leave. Haimad himself think about it clearly, the way he made himself think clearly about the things he didn't want to think about. She had come here running from something. She had said from the beginning it was temporary. She had a degree and skills and her whole life ahead of her, and she was 26 years old, and this was his ranch and his land and his wounds, not hers. He put the folder back exactly where he'd found it. He finished the morning work. At breakfast, she was talking about the East Paddock rotation, and he sat across from her and listened and answered and handed her the coffee when she reached for it. And he was so careful, so completely careful, that he almost missed the moment she stopped mid-sentence and looked at him. What happened? She said. Nothing, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the barn. Then she looked back at him. The tack room shelf, she said. Not a question. He said nothing. Cole. Her voice was careful. You don't have to explain anything, he said. You came here with a plan, and the plan was always temporary, and I... He stopped, made himself continue. You don't owe me anything. You've given this place more than anyone had a right to ask for. She was very quiet. I made those copies 2 weeks ago, she said. Before... She stopped. Before what? He said. She looked at him across the table. Her jaw was set. Not defensive, working toward something. Before I understood that what I was afraid of here wasn't being temporary, she said. It was being permanent. She held his gaze. There's a difference. And it took me a while to figure out which one was the real fear. Cole was very still. The job's in that folder, she said. I haven't applied for any of them. He said nothing. I pulled them up because I was scared, she said. Because I felt things getting real in a way that... She stopped. Her voice was steady, but there was an effort in the steadiness. I've been afraid of real before. Real turned into something that made me smaller. And I promised myself I would never let that happen again. I would never, he started. I know that, she said, and she said it with such immediate certainty that it stopped him. I know that, Cole. That's the part that scared me. That I trusted you that fast. After everything. She exhaled. I'm not used to trusting something that quickly and having it be right. Cole sat with that. With all of it. With the truth of it and the difficulty of it, and the fact that she was being more honest with him right now than most people had been in his entire life. So you're staying, he said. He said it quietly, not as a question, but with the carefulness of a man who knows that the way he says something matters. She looked at him. I want to stay, she said. If that's... She stopped. Is that what you want? Cole put his hands on the table. He looked at them. Then he looked at her. And the wall. The one he had been building for 6 years, stone by stone, grief by grief, day by solitary day. Cracked. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just a crack, hairline at first, and then wider. And the light that came through it was the particular light of someone finally being seen. Yes, he said. That's what I want. She pressed her lips together. Something moved in her face that was not quite tears, but was in the family of tears. Okay, she said. One more time. But this time the word was enormous. He reached across the table. She put her hand in his. They sat like that for a moment. Hands on the table between them. No grand gestures, no speeches. Just two people who had been broken by different things, sitting in a kitchen in Montana in January, with the cold outside and the coffee hot, and the particular, fragile, real weight of two lives touching. Grit walked in from the back hall, looked at both of them, and went and lay down in front of the stove. Emily laughed, the real kind. Cole felt the crack in the wall become a door. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. The hand was enough. The staying was enough. The truth between them, finally stopped being carried alone, was enough. Outside, the winter was as hard as it had been. The land was still there. The fences were still standing. The horses were in the barn, and the foal was growing, and the east pasture was still exactly where his grandfather had put it in 1947. And Cole Harrison sat in his kitchen with a woman's hand in his, and for the first time in 6 years, the thought of the future did not feel like something to endure. It felt like something to want. Holding her hand across that kitchen table was one thing. Knowing what to do next was another. Cole had never been good at the space between deciding something and doing it. He was a man of action when action was physical. Fence posts and full deliveries and driving through ice to keep what was his. But this was different territory. This was the territory where he'd always been least sure of his footing, where the ground could shift without warning, and where he'd learned the hardest possible lesson about how fast everything could change. So he held her hand for that moment, real and solid and true. And then the morning came back. The water checks, the horses, the feed schedule. And they both stood up and moved back into the day the way people do when what just happened is too important to treat carelessly. You don't poke at new things. You let them breathe. But something had shifted in the architecture of the house. Both of them felt it. Neither of them said it directly, because they were both people who had learned that naming a fragile thing too soon could break it. What changed was small. He stopped hesitating at the kitchen doorway when she was already in it. She stopped making herself invisible in the corners of rooms when he came in from the barn. The 14 inches of careful distance on the porch had narrowed without announcement. When she handed him something, a mug, a tool, a folder, their hands met differently now. Not dramatically, just honestly. Grit had given up all pretense of loyalty and distributed himself equally between them, which Cole found both traitorous and secretly satisfying. It was Hank Dearborn who said the thing out loud first, which was typical of Hank, who believed that the most useful thing a man could do was name what everyone else was dancing around. He came out to the ranch on a Saturday in late January, officially to look at a 2-year-old colt Cole was thinking about selling. Unofficially, Cole understood, to take stock of things. Hank had been checking in since the night with Calloway's men, not hovering, not demanding to be told things, just present at intervals in the reliable way of a man who had decided you mattered. They were at the fence looking at the colt when Hank said, without preamble, "She's good for you." Cole said nothing. "I'm not asking," Hank said. "I'm telling you, because sometimes you need to hear a thing from outside your own head." He watched the colt move. "The last 3 years I've known you, you looked like a man waiting to be done with something. You don't look like that anymore." Cole kept his eyes on the colt. "She's still figuring things out," Cole said. "We both are." "Sure," Hank said. "And while you're both figuring things out, the ranch hasn't looked this good in the time I've been coming here. And you've laughed twice since I got here an hour ago, which is twice more than the last 18 months combined." He glanced at Cole sideways. "I'm just noting the data." Cole looked at him. "You spend a lot of time watching me," he said. "Someone's got to," Hank said, and there was something in it. The easy, gruff, unadorned affection of a man who does not say "I care about you," but says it in every other possible way. That hit Cole somewhere he wasn't braced for. He looked back at the colt. "She's planning to stay," Cole said. It was the first time he'd said it to anyone. Hearing it out loud did something to him. Made it more real, made it heavier and lighter at the same time. Hank nodded once, like a man filing information. "Good," he said, and left it there. Emily had started doing something Cole noticed, but didn't comment on for almost a week. She had begun, in the evenings after the work was done, going through the old ranch records. Not the financial ones, not the operational files she'd already organized. The historical ones, the oldest boxes, the ones with his grandfather's handwriting and faded photographs and the original land grant documents. She was organizing them. Carefully, methodically, with the archival instinct of someone who understood that the history of a place was part of its value. She labeled things. She put fragile documents in protective sleeves. She started a running index. He stood in the doorway of the small room she'd claimed for the project one evening and watched her hold a photograph up to the lamp with the gentle, focused attention she brought to every living thing she handled. "That's my grandfather," he said. She looked up, then back at the photo. "He looks like you," she said, "around the jaw." Cole came into the room and looked at the photo. His grandfather at 40 probably, standing at the fence line of the property. The same mountains behind him. The same posture, shoulders squared, chin level, the posture of a man who knew exactly where he stood. "He built this place with his own hands," Cole said. "He and my grandmother. 2 years living in what was basically a converted barn before the house was finished." Emily set the photo down carefully. She looked up at him. "Tell me about her," she said. Cole sat down on the floor of the room, leaning against the wall, and he talked. He told her about his grandmother Louise, who had grown up in Georgia and followed a man she loved to Montana and learned to birth calves and drive fence posts and can vegetables and keep books in a ledger with a handwriting so neat it looked printed. He told her about how Louise had kept a garden every year until she was 79, and how after she died, his grandfather had kept it going for 2 more years until he died too, because he said he didn't know how to let it go. Emily listened the way she always listened, fully, without filling the silences with noise, without steering it anywhere. When he stopped, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The quilt in my room." "Hers," Cole said. "She made it." Emily looked at him. "That's why you almost took it off the bed," she said. "When I first came." He looked at her. "And then you didn't," she said. He said nothing. "Why didn't you?" she asked, soft, genuinely wanting to know. He thought about it honestly. Because you looked at it like it was worth something, he said. And I didn't want to take that away. She held his gaze. And something moved in her face, full and real and unhurried. And she reached over and put her hand briefly on his arm, and then went back to the photograph. She would have liked you, Cole said. He hadn't planned to say it. It came out of the truth the way things come out of truth, without permission. Emily looked up. How do you know? She said. Because she liked people who worked, he said. And people who saw things clearly. And people who didn't need to be impressive to be worth knowing. He paused. She had no patience for performance. Emily was very still. No, she said quietly. Neither do I. They sat in the small room with the old photographs between them, and the house was warm, and outside the January wind was doing what January wind does, and none of that mattered as much as the fact that Cole Harrison was talking about his grandmother, was talking about his family, his history, the deep roots of this land and this life, to another person for the first time in years, and it felt not like loss, but like restoration. The first real test came from a direction neither of them expected. It came in the form of a phone call at 7 in the morning on a Thursday, from a man named Daniel Ashford, who ran a large horse operation in Wyoming, and who had gotten Cole's name from the Bozeman ranch that had arranged the reckless breeding deal. He wanted to buy Gunsmoke, not lease, not breed, buy, outright. He named a price that was significant enough that Cole sat down at the kitchen table and looked at the number he'd written on the legal pad and felt the specific conflict of a man who needs money and loves an animal and is trying to reconcile those two things. Emily came in from outside and took one look at his face. What happened? She said. He told her. She sat down. She looked at the number. That's a serious offer, she said. I know, he said. She looked at him carefully. What do you want to do? I don't know, he said, which was honest and unusual. Cole Harrison generally knew what he wanted to do and was just deciding whether to do it. Is it the money or the horse? She asked. He looked at her. The horse, he said. She nodded slowly. Then tell me what the horse is worth to you, she said. Not in money. What is he to you now? Cole thought about Gunsmoke. About 8 months of careful, patient rebuilding. About the afternoon in the paddock. When the big gray had finally walked to Emily and put his nose against her shoulder, the day Cole had understood that the horse had crossed back from fear into trust. About the particular satisfaction of watching a damaged thing become whole. He's proof, Cole said. He hadn't known that was the word until he said it. He's proof that it's possible. Emily was quiet for a moment. Then you're not selling him, she said, simply, like it was already decided. The money is not worth the proof, she said. Not to you. I know what you have and what you need, and the money helps, but it doesn't help enough to matter more than what that horse means. She held his gaze. Cole, you have spent 8 months teaching a damaged animal to trust again. That is not something you sell. He looked at her. He looked at the number on the legal pad. He looked back at her. You're going to tell Ashford no, she said, not pushing, just certain. He picked up the legal pad and folded it in half. Yeah, he said. She made coffee. He called Ashford. He was polite and clear, and the answer was no, and when he hung up, he felt the rightness of it settle through him like good water through dry ground. He turned around, and Emily handed him a mug without saying, I told you so, because she was not that kind of person, and he drank his coffee and looked at her and thought, with the quiet, devastating certainty of a man who has finally stopped lying to himself, that he was in love with her. Not the early kind, not the dizzy kind. The real kind. The kind that is built from watching someone work and listening to someone think, and knowing how they take their coffee, and what their face does when they're trying not to be afraid, and what their voice sounds like when they're talking to a frightened horse in the dark. The built kind. He set his mug down. I was going to have to tell her. He knew it the way he knew weather. In the body first, then the mind. He was going to have to say it, and the saying of it was going to be the most terrifying thing he'd done in 6 years. More terrifying than Calloway's men and the easement claim and the letter from his father and all of it. because those things had threatened his land, and this threatened everything underneath the land. But not today. He wasn't ready today. He needed to be sure. Not of her, he was already sure of her, but of himself. Of whether he was healed enough to offer something real, without the wound underneath it doing damage, he couldn't predict. He gave himself 2 weeks. He lasted 9 days. It was the dream that did it. He'd had variations of it for 6 years. The dream where he came home, and the house was dark, and the phone was ringing, and he already knew before he answered it, because the knowing was in the air, the way you know some things before they reach you. I had the dream on a Wednesday night, and woke at 2 in the morning with the familiar cold shock of it, lying in the dark with his heart loud in his chest. And he put his arm over his eyes and breathed, and did what he always did. Waited for the feeling to pass. But this time, it didn't pass the same way. This time, lying in the dark, the dream shifted in his memory into something he hadn't expected. He saw the dream, and then he saw, right after it, clear and immediate and real, Emily in the kitchen that morning, laughing at something Grit had done. Emily in the paddock with her hand against Gunsmoke's jaw. Emily on the porch in the dark saying, "I stopped running the day I agreed to stay." The dream was the past. The other images were the present. He lay in the dark and understood something that Rebecca and Hank and the whole slow weight of 6 years had been building toward. He had not been keeping himself lonely because he was protecting himself. He had been keeping himself lonely because he believed he deserved it. Because the guilt had told him that happiness was a betrayal of loss, that moving forward was a way of saying the loss hadn't mattered. And he had believed that with the complete conviction of a man who has made a faith of his own punishment. He lay in the dark with that understanding and felt it change him. Not instantly, not the movie version of a revelation. Just a slow, real, interior shift. The kind that happens when a bone that's been set wrong for years finally moves into alignment. Painful. Necessary. Right. He got up. He put on his boots. He was not going to wait anymore. He knocked on her door. A pause. Then, "Yeah?" "It's me," he said. Another pause. "Come in," she said. She was sitting up in bed, the quilt around her shoulders, her hair down, and her expression was alert and careful. The expression of someone who has learned that unexpected knocks in the night sometimes carry weight. "Are you okay?" she said immediately. "Yes," he said. He stood in the doorway. He didn't sit down. He needed to be standing for this. "Cole," she said. Her voice was quiet. "It's 2 in the morning." "I know," he said. "I'm sorry. I need to say something, and I've been waiting until I thought I was ready, and I'm done waiting because I don't think ready works the way I thought it did." She looked at him. She pulled the quilt slightly tighter around her shoulders, but she did not look away. "I've been punishing myself," he said. "For 6 years. I told myself it was grief, but it wasn't only grief. It was guilt. I thought I should have been home that night. I thought if I'd been home, she wouldn't have been driving alone, and none of it would have happened." His voice was steady. He'd made it steady. "I've been living like a man doing a sentence. Like I owed something to the loss, and the payment was never being happy again." Emily had gone very still. "And then you came," he said. "And I didn't ask for it, and I didn't want it, and you brought a full pot of coffee back into this kitchen, and you saved a foal at 3 in the morning, and you fought for my land like it was yours, and you got Gunsmoke to trust again, and—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "And somewhere in all of that I understood that what I was doing wasn't honoring Sarah. It was wasting the life she would have wanted me to live." He paused. "She was not a woman who would have wanted this for me. I knew her. She would have been furious with me for this." Something broke in Emily's expression, just slightly. Her eyes were very bright. "I love you," he said. The words came out clear and unambiguous. The way everything he said was clear and unambiguous, because Cole Harrison did not know how to say things halfway. "I'm not ready in the way that means I'm perfect at it, or that I won't get it wrong sometimes. But I'm ready in the way that means I mean it, and I know what it is, and I'm not going to run from it." The room was very quiet. Emily looked at him for a long moment. He watched her face move through things. He had learned to read her face over these months. The way you learn to read weather or horses. And what he saw was not fear and not caution, but something that was fighting its way to the surface through both of those things. "Cole," she said. Her voice had changed. It was not the steady, controlled voice. It was the underneath voice. "I've been afraid to say it because the last time I thought I felt this, I was wrong. I thought I knew what real felt like, and I was so wrong that I stopped trusting myself entirely." "I know," he said. "But this is different," she said. "And I knew it was different from the very beginning, and that scared me more than anything else because I didn't want to be right and then lose it." Her voice was holding, barely. "I don't want to lose this." "Then don't," he said. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob. "I love you," she said. And she said it the way she said true things, with the calm, clear certainty of someone who has verified the information thoroughly before reporting it. "I have for a while. I've been waiting for it to start being less true, and it just keeps being more true." Cole crossed the room. He sat on the edge of the bed, and he took her face in both hands, and he looked at her for a moment. This woman who had come in out of a storm and saved a foal and fought for his land and given his dog a new religion and walked into his grandmother's quilt and slowly, patiently, completely dismantled 6 years of careful isolation. And he felt the wall come down, not crack, not just a door. The whole thing. All of it. The weight of it went somewhere, the way pain goes when you finally let it be real. And what was left underneath was just him. Just Cole. The man his grandfather had been proud of. The man his grandmother would have recognized. The man who was still capable of this. He kissed her. She kissed him back. And it was nothing like anything from 6 years ago because it wasn't from 6 years ago. It was from right now, from all of this, from 700 acres of earned land and a foal named Chance, and a legal battle won, and a dog who had always known what was true. The town shifted the way small towns eventually do when they can't argue with the evidence anymore. It wasn't fast. It wasn't a moment. It was the slow accumulation of things seen and known. Cole Harrison, who used to walk into Teller's Hardware like a man walking through his own sentence, laughing with the woman beside him about something that happened with the horses. Emily Carter, who people had whispered about as a drifter and a stranger, showing up at the county agricultural meeting with a 3-year financial projections document for the Triple H that made the older ranchers in the room go quiet and then start taking notes. Dale Marsh told his wife, who told people, that Emily had turned Cole's books around and won him a legal fight against a Billings developer that most men would have lost. The story grew in the way good stories grow, not into fiction, but into itself, more complete with every telling. Hank and his riders came to the ranch in February for what became an unofficial celebration of the Calloway verdict, and they filled the kitchen and the porch and moved in and out of the barn, and Emily cooked for 12 people without being asked and without complaint, and Cole watched her move through his house and his people like someone who had always known where things were. Hank caught his eye at one point across the kitchen. He just nodded. Cole nodded back. That was enough. "Jamen." The hardest conversation came in March. It came because Cole made it come. He woke up one morning and understood that he had been carrying the last piece of the 6-year weight without putting it down, and that he needed to put it down in the only way it could properly be put down. He drove to the cemetery in Ridgecrest alone. He hadn't been since the first year. He stood at Sarah's grave for a long time without saying anything. Then he said what he'd come to say. He told her he was sorry. He hadn't been home that night. He told her he had spent 6 years believing the guilt was honoring her, and he understood now that it wasn't. He told her about the ranch, about the foal, about the legal fight, about Gunsmoke, and what the horse had taught him about broken things and time, and the willingness to try again. He told her about Emily, not apologetically, not with explanation, just honestly, the way you tell the truth to someone who deserves to have it. He told her that he was going to live now, really live, that he thought she would want that he was almost certain she would have said so in very direct terms by now if she could have. He stood there a while longer. Then he said goodbye. Not the way you say goodbye to someone you're putting away. The way you say goodbye to someone you love, who has to go while you stay, and who you will carry differently now, not as a weight, but as a part of what made you who you are. He drove home. Emily was at the kitchen table when he came in. She looked at his face, and she knew immediately, with the instinct she had for knowing things about him that he didn't say, that something significant had happened. She didn't ask. She got up and made coffee, and she put a mug in front of him, and she sat back down. He put his hand on the table. She put hers on top of it. They sat like that for a long time. It was enough. Spring came to the valley, the way Montana. Spring always does, reluctantly, in stages, 2 steps forward and 1 step back, cold mornings, and then sudden warmth, and then cold again. The ground came alive slowly. The horses moved differently, the way they always did when the air changed. Emily started a garden. She asked Cole first, because it was his land and his property, and she phrased the question in the careful way she had when she was asking for something she wanted but didn't want to push for. "My grandmother kept a garden," he said. "Out behind the main barn. The beds are still there. Haven't been used in about 15 years. Emily looked at him. "Is that a yes?" she said. "That's a yes," he said. She started the garden on a Saturday morning in late April, and Cole brought her coffee and watched her work without pretending he was doing something else. And she looked up and caught him watching, and did not look away. And he did not look away. And they stayed like that for a moment in the spring light. 2 people who had been broken differently, and repaired each other in the particular way that only happens when 2 honest people stop being careful at the same time. The last twist came in May, and it came gently, which was a mercy. Emily's mother Donna called on a Sunday. Cole heard Emily's side of the conversation from the barn. He wasn't eavesdropping. She was on the porch, her voice carrying in the spring air. He heard her laugh. He heard her say, "Yes, Mom, I'm sure." He heard her say his name. When the call ended, she came into the barn and stood near Gunsmoke's stall and said, without looking at Cole, "My mother wants to come visit." "Okay," Cole said. "She wants to see the ranch." A pause. "She wants to meet you." Cole worked for a moment without answering. "Tell her June is a good time," he said. "The foal will be out in the east paddock by then. She can meet Chance." Emily turned and looked at him. Her expression was something he had learned was one of her rarest, unguarded and bright and completely happy in a way that had no defense around it. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. Gunsmoke put his head over the stall door, and Emily reached up and scratched between his ears, and the horse leaned into it with a contentment that would have been unthinkable 8 months ago, and Cole watched them and thought about proof, about what it meant, about the particular satisfaction of a damaged thing that had made it all the way back. On a morning in late May, Cole stood outside the barn before sunrise. He had his coffee. The air had the smell of warming ground and early grass, and everything that meant the hard season was finished. Emily came out of the house and walked toward him. She had her own coffee. She stood beside him, not 14 inches away, not careful distance, right beside him, her shoulder against his arm. They looked at the mountains. After a while she said, "What are you thinking about?" I thought about it honestly. About his grandfather and his grandmother and the quilt and the land. About Sarah, held now in the way he'd learned to hold her, real and gone, and loved and grieved, and finally, no longer a sentence. About Hank and his riders at the end of the road in the dark. About Calloway retreating. About a foal's first steps and a dog choosing where to sleep, and a folder of job listings that had never been sent. About a woman who had driven into a storm and found his fence line and stayed. "I'm thinking," he said, "that I don't need a perfect life." She looked at him. "I only need you," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were very bright. She pressed her lips together and looked back at the mountains, and he felt her lean slightly into his arm, and he put his arm around her, and they stood there together in the early light of a Montana spring morning, on the land that his grandfather built, and that Cole had nearly lost, and that Emily had helped him save, in more ways than one. The coffee was warm. The ground was coming back to life. Chance was in the east paddock, growing fast, full of the uncomplicated confidence of a creature that had never been given a reason to doubt it was worth saving. And Cole Harrison, who had spent 6 years learning to live with absence, who had forgotten what it felt like to want morning to come, stood in the light with the woman he loved and felt, for the first time in a very long time, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, not despite the pain. Because of everything, the pain had finally taught him to let go.